Hi all, let's look at a very interesting game of Bobby Fischer against Gregoric in the Bled tournament of 1959. So Svetska Gregoric playing black. The Bled tournament was a candidates tournament taking place in Yugoslav cities such as Bled, Zagreb and Belgrade. So it was an epic contest of 28 rounds, each competitor facing the others 4 times over 2 months. So quite a grueling tournament indeed. Okay, Fischer playing white kicked off with e4 and Gregoric played the Sicilian defence, and actually the variation chosen turned into the Sicilian dragon. After d6, bishop c4, bishop d7, bishop b3. It could have remained a kind of Scheveningen, although here e6 looks totally unplayable because of knight b5, so a6 maybe to try and make that work, but no, black is going for the Sicilian dragon with g6. Okay, so the bishop d7 has already been inserted here. f3, standard move against the Sicilian dragon. Knight a5. Now bishop g5, which is more aggressive perhaps than bishop e3. Okay, bishop g7, queen d2, and now, okay, a slight downside of bishop g5 is that it can be kicked back with h6, but it goes to e3, and h6 is a little bit of a problem here. So what is black going to do? He can't immediately castle now. He plays rook c8, just going to get rid of this light square bishop. Now white castles. Knight c4. And usually white would take on c4. In this particular position, Fischer just chose queen e2, not minding the loss of his dark square bishop. And you might think a lot of the bite surely is taken out of white's attack, that he's letting black get away with murder, creating that kind of h6 pawn and not keeping the battery against h6. But of course there was no guarantee black could really doesn't need to castle immediately. He could play h5 and stuff. We'll need to look at that in the second pass, but it's an interesting decision this, to give up the dark square bishop here, and it is taken. Okay, so queen takes e3 is now played. So after castles here, okay, does white have such a strong attack with the light square bishop instead of the dark squared one? Fischer now plays g4, which shows that the idea of h4 and then either h5 or g5 is still potentially dangerous. Queen a5 and now h4. e6, trying to blunt this light square bishop. Now we see the move knight de2, which reinforces against any potential exchange sack. Black builds up pressure, or tries to, on the c file with rook c6, defending d6 as well. Now we see g5. After hg, hg, knight h5. So is black solid with this structure? Well, Fischer plows on with f4. So potentially now f5 is getting to be a little bit dangerous. If it takes the d5 square, could be dangerous. But rook fc8 is played by black, not minding f5 here. We see king b1 being played. Okay, queen b6, offering an exchange of queens, which is rejected. Queen f3, and now rook c5 is played. Now in this position you might think, oh, it's tempting, so tempting maybe to sack on h5, and we'll have to check that in the second pass. It seems, given the queen's on f3 here, why not? Or is it unclear how the attack proceeds? But we'll check that in the second pass. Fischer actually played in this position queen d3, being a little bit pedantic about the d6 pawn, asking that to be protected. And now black actually gives up the dark square bishop voluntarily to either fracture white's pawn structure or win the f4 pawn. After bishop takes c3, Fischer decides that he doesn't want double pawns here. He plays knight takes c3, offering f4, and that is actually taken, which still looks a little bit dangerous because this f file now could be a target for f7. Queen f3, after knight h5. In this position now, Fischer does sacrifice the exchange, rook takes h5, and it looks really dangerous intuitively, this position, with rook h1 and queen h8 being the mating threat. But not only that, there's g6 as a threat, but at the moment, of course, the rook is pinning the g5 pawn. Bishop e8 is played, and then we see queen h6 basically unpinning that pawn, free for g6. But there's also, of course, the constant threat of rook h1. And you might think, well, could rook h1 have been played here? Possibly. Without queen h6, the king could make a run for it, believe it or not, to the centre. So queen h6 makes rook h1 more effective, perhaps, without king f8 as a resource. But we'll check that out in the second pass. So queen h6 introduced two things, really. Rook h1 without a king running away, and g6 because without the pawn being pinned. So black reacts with rook takes c3 here, which looks very, very interesting. Counter sack. After b takes, rook takes c3. So the question is here, for example, is rook h1 playable? But there's also, of course, another strong move to make rook h1 even more effective. And it's first really opening up that f file. Fischer plays g6, just tearing open the f file, and also threatening g7. That would be threatening to mate with the pawn on h8. Okay, this is really, really dangerous. Black now takes on g6, and now rook h1, and this escape is not really on. A move like queen h7 surely could end up winning the rook. The rook could be a tactical target if king f6, queen h8, or even worse, the king's going to just get mated with rook f1. Black tries in this position queen d4, protecting h8, but alas, the f file is still too dangerous. So check, and here black resigns. Zvezda had to resign here. Because if king f8, then I believe rook f1. Let's check that out now. Let's go over this game with an engine. So here, king f8, rook f1 is a mate in 4. Black would just, it's a desperate computer move to give up the rook and give up the queen. It's mating on f7. So that was really made to look easy. Let's have a look why it was so easy. Where did black actually go wrong? And it seemed to really a Sicilian dragon with a big difference. First of all, this system of bishop d7 going into the dragon, not immediately, but inserting that bishop d7, fine. Now white's use of bishop e3. I think most players against the dragon will be considering bishop e3, not bishop g5. Which does mean that h6 is available to black pretty soon. In fact, here, the bishop just goes back. And you might think, well, job done, created another weakness. But black doesn't have to castle, clearly. Did white miss any other opportunity here? I think bishop e3 is liked by the engine, as well as castling. So knight c4. And here the engine really likes actually just taking this knight. And I wonder really what black would do with this constant threat on h6 to relieve that. So let's just go for this just technically to see what's happening here. Black doesn't castle, so let's say a6, b5. Is there a problem for black delaying things? So h4, queen d3. Black's not really using the rook here on h8, so you might think there must be a downside to this. The engine likes h5 here, maybe trying to get the f5 square. Okay, so in this position it could start to be tricky. So G takes this knight f5, but e5 more resistant. Okay, it's not really a huge deal to write home about, actually. 0.27 here. So it's just interesting to consider. But in the game, just Queen e2 was played. And Black took on e3, and the engine actually likes Black's position here. Slight advantage to Black. Black castled. G4. Queen a5. About equal. h4. e6 now. And then we see knight de2. Again, about equal, better for Black. Rook c6. Pardon me, knight de2 did expose an attack on d6 here. That's a real threat. Or can it be ignored with b5? It looks a bit dangerous to ignore d6. If it is ignored, does Black get sufficient counterplay? e5 in this position, technical move. And another technical move, knight takes e3, offering a piece sack to win d7. If knight d5 there, takes. This could be a disaster on the d file. Okay, so let's not go too far into that. So basically, with knight de2, as well as strengthening c3, d6 is also attacked, so that's why rook c6 makes sense. g5 now, and white seems to be increasing his attack quite rapidly after hg, knight h5. This latent power of f4 threatening potentially f5 in some variations. Rook fc8. And we saw king b1, which the engine really likes. So if f5 here, does that actually do anything? Does it really backfire? E takes, I mean, let's say knight d5 or rook d5. That looks good. It's a different way of playing the position here. It's nice to keep the queens on. So this isn't such a clear pawn sack, actually. So king b1 was played. And I guess this also gives time to help defend with queen c1s if needed. Imagine there's a sack on c3 with a very dangerous bishop. Queen c1 might have to be a resource. If king b1 isn't played, let's go with like a move we might consider, or someone might consider. All of a sudden, you know, black's potentially in the driving seat. b5, and it's getting quite dangerous. Okay, so king b1 is a kind of prophylaxis move, but it does offer some defensive resources as well. Queen b6, which may be the it looks like a blunder, a little bit of a technical inaccuracy, unless black's already in trouble here. I can't imagine black being able to sack the exchange here for some reason with the other knight reinforcing here. It's not so clear, this exchange sack. In this position, actually, rook h3 would evict the bishop straight off the bat. Rook d6. It's not so, because a resource like queen a1, actually there's even e5, no need for queen c1. So nothing's really working on c3 right now, basically. So queen b6, and it looks as though white just has a strong attack. So it just shows you don't even need the dark square bishop. The light square bishop will do. So rook c5, and here the engine does like the immediate rook h5. It does look fairly attractive intuitively, but I guess the follow-up must be quite technical in nature, too technical maybe even for Fischer. Say bishop e8 here. Okay, now the engine likes f5. So e takes. In this position, rook f1. So where is this heading? Just to play e takes f5, maybe. That does seem dangerous. If black gives up the pawn, we get this kind of counter-attack which is too late. Something technical like knight g6 now uses the pin, threatens something nasty. Not queen h8 clearly. Knight e7 check maybe. So say d5, knight e7 check. Knight takes d5. It just looks great for white. It looks really dangerous. Okay, so we go back in this position. Curiously, well, queen d3 was played, not sacking the exchange immediately. Then bishop takes c3, knight takes f4, accepting the pawn sack, which doesn't do wonders for black's king safety. Queen f3. And now it looks as though black's busted here, actually. So this may have been a bit of a greedy episode from black to have done this bishop c3. If the knight doesn't take, I mean, how bad is it? This position, it looks as though f5 is a strong move on the king's side and a4 on the queen's side for some reason. Maybe that's just a preliminary for f5. This is really undermining the knight. So in this position, rook takes f5, there's rook takes h5, I guess. Loose rook. So yeah, this is just really dangerous for black already. So what he did is just already in a bad position, really, just making things worse. And now the exchange sack just seems entirely logical. Bishop e8. So queen h6 looks brilliant as a move to stop the king escaping. The engine just likes rook h1. No, even what about king f8 though? So if king f8, the most powerful move seems to be bishop e6 here. And let's say just take, for argument's sake, that's a mate in 5. So check, check, check. And it's mating on d7. So let's go back and consider king e7 here, taking the rook. There's knight d5 now, winning the queen. It's not too good. So this looks crushing as well. But I think queen h6. Is there really any defense? Black tries rook c3. Takes. Now queen e3 is mentioned by the engine here. I don't think it really helps particularly, but it doesn't leave a loose rook on c3. So let's just try that. Rook h1, queen takes c3, eyeing protecting h8, g6 here. This looks horrendous. Check. In this position, g takes f7. F takes. Check wins the rook on c8. Oh dear, oh dear. If bishop g8, then rook g8. Oh, it's all falling apart. It's just king safety. It can just win material if nothing else. So b takes, we saw rook takes c3. g6 is just crushing. Too many good resources around the king here. So fg, rook h1 to queen d4, check, and rook f1 is a force mate. Simple as that. So the dragon slayed by Fischer in the Bled tournament of 1959. I think Fischer mentioned about how routine sacking on h5 was that he should apply for a patent. So okay, but the dragon today has still got a good reputation. It hasn't really been proven as a totally unsound opening. You just need to know your stuff theoretically to be able to play it. Otherwise you will get slaughtered on the h-file. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.